on it.
No rest of the wicked.
Or us.
All right. Thanks, guys.
See you, Andrew.
Well, I welcome our representative from Evo Cities, and for the Hansard record, could you please give your name and the capacity in which you appear today?
Certainly, Mathew Dickerson, probably here on 3 different capacities. I'm here technically as the chairman of Evo Cities, but I'm also on the board of Regional Capitals Australia, so I bring some insight from that perspective, and obviously here as the mayor of the city of Dubbo as well, one of those 50 regional capitals defined in the regional capitals.
Well, with 3 targets, oh no, I was just going to invite Senator Whish-Wilson to get stuck in because you provide 3 targets for us, but I won't do that. I'll first ask you whether, with respect to your submission number 56, you'd like to make any additions or amendments.
No, and that submission was put in before I was chairman. I became chairman in July last year, but I'm familiar with that submission, obviously.
And happy to answer questions on it?
Happy to answer questions on it. I've obviously read it and familiar with it. I suppose the only minor thing is that obviously statistics have moved on now. Some of the statistics quoted in that particular document now would be slightly out of date, but I'll work off those stats, if you like, so that it makes sense.
Sure. Now, do you have an opening statement?
Sure, I'll give a quick overview, if you like.
Yep.
I want to just jump back very briefly to 1911.
By the way, don't feel constrained by the submission. Given that you've got 3 hats, you can comment on each of them as a choose.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that, because I was intending on doing that. So you've given me permission to do what I was hoping to do. If I jump back very briefly to 1911, if you look at a heat map of the population, and just pick on New South Wales, for example, in 1911, there was population distributed across the entire state because people really worked where they lived. So there were large population centres spread throughout New South Wales. Broken Hill was quite large, for example, and lots of red dots across a heat map. In 1908, Henry Ford came out with the Model T Ford, which came to Australia a year later, and in 1922, Qantas started flying their first passengers. So when you look at that same heat map in 2011, look at the census from 2011, you get several large red dots spread out throughout New South Wales and across the nation, and obviously those smaller dots that were spread out there have largely disappeared. And what's happened is there's been a decoupling to a certain extent of where people work compared to where they live. Obviously, when you didn't have a motor car, you worked very close to where you lived because it wasn't convenient to commute. So that's been a dramatic change in our overall landscape. And that decoupling has been to the detriment of regional areas because people have typically moved to areas where they saw there was better amenities. So they moved to, you mentioned the surf before at Port Macquarie and Coff, so people have moved to areas where they saw that the amenity was better, and that ended up being along coastal areas because they saw those as nicer places to live. So that's been to the absolute detriment of regional areas in terms of population numbers. What we see now, though, is that it's gotten to the point where I think we've got it wrong as a nation. And where we have our population densities, obviously in the major metropolitan areas, and let's just pick on the 8 state capitals for the moment, 15.6 million people across the 8 state capitals, a population density of 310 people per square kilometre. And when you look at those state capitals, very congested. I mean, Andrew just spoke a moment ago about the transport issues. If I look at Sydney, for example, North West Rail Link, for a very small section of railway, they're spending $8.3 billion on that small section of railway to cater to that exploding population in Sydney. And I think that's where we've got it wrong. We keep trying to work out ways to make our metropolitan areas more livable, make those areas better to live in with that huge population. Meanwhile, what we've got are regional capitals spread across the nation that can absolutely handle that population. And if we just take, if I put the Regional Capitals Australia hat on for a moment, 50 regional capitals we define across the nation. The combined population of those 50 is approximately 4.1 million. And so it's equivalent roughly to a Sydney or a Melbourne. And if I look at where I think we've got it wrong, rather than keep trying to make metropolitan cities more livable, what we should be doing is saying, let's get people out of these metropolitan areas and get them into these regional capitals. And when you look at the headroom that we've got in regional capitals, so for example, we've got 31% headroom in water and sewer, 20% headroom in power, 40% headroom in zoned land, we could expand those regional capitals quite easily by 20 to 40% with very little infrastructure work being done in those cities apart from building the houses that people would need to live in. But the land is owned, the water and sewer is there, the electricity is there.
Sorry to interrupt, but this is the work of Evo Cities, isn't it, to persuade people to up stumps and so you've had 2,300 success stories, which is a lot of success stories.
Yep.
But people are... broadly speaking, I'm with you, that I think that we've got potential in the regions to house and provide a quality of life in regional cities. Nevertheless, there are a lot of people voting with their feet and staying in the capitals, and I am sympathetic with the need to provide infrastructure for them too. So I don't think it's an either or. I don't think we should abandon infrastructure expenditure in the capital cities, but we need to ensure that there's appropriate investment in regional capitals. But maybe that's my submission. I shouldn't be making it carry on.
No, I think it's an interesting point you make.
Just a quick, so is that the end of my opening statement? Is that,
No, go on. Keep going.
But I will just say, I think the point you're trying to make, though, Councillor, is that for efficiency and bang for your buck, we could get more in regional areas for the same dollar spent.
correct, and that's, yeah. So I'm happy to take a question. I'm happy to continue on with my opening statement if you like.
Please continue. I don't think, I just wanted to make the point on the way through, I don't think it's an either or. We need to continue investing in our capitals without ignoring the potential of the regional capitals. And this job of encouraging people into the regional capitals is a job that isn't being undone because you're doing it.
That's right, for one state anyway.
Yeah, yes.
So the point that Peter makes is absolutely spot on. We're spending at the moment, in the projections on infrastructure spend, we're spending approximately $12,226 per person per year of growth in the 8 state capitals. The equivalent growth across the rest of the nation, this isn't even regional capitals, is $2,635 per person per year. So I think, exactly as you mentioned, there is definitely potential to change some of the spending. So what we feel is that when you're talking about making sure there's a balance there, we feel that...
Just do those figures again, because that was interesting. I just want to make sure I've got it locked in.
$12,226 per person per year.
Spent on?
It's spent on infrastructure over the next... These are projections... actually, I got some of the figures from Jamie Briggs. These are figures that the federal government has said that they will spend on infrastructure in state capitals in terms of money they're putting towards those infrastructure spends. That's per person per year in the 8 state capitals. The rest of the money that's left for infrastructure spend across the nation is $2,635 per person per year.
I'm just going to have a word with the Secretariat and whisper in his ear and say, can we make sure that gets a mention later? Like when we're doing it?
And I can give you the background to those calculations if you like. But so, Joe, where you're coming from is saying that we don't want to forget about spending on the capital cities. I suppose where we're coming from is we feel like the spending on regional areas, regional capitals, has been forgotten about, so it needs to be probably the pendulum swinging back across in the other direction.
I think it's good to have, perhaps if you could provide some of the underpinning for those figures, so we're not
absolutely.
If you could do that on notice, then that would give those figures a higher degree of credibility, and we could swing something off it back.
Absolutely, and they're numbers that I've taken from, obviously, the federal government in estimation of what they're spending over the next 20 or 30 years.
I think that's good stuff. Thank you.
So if I just continue on briefly, and I'll finish off my opening statement. So the entire concept is really about that shift of getting away from just focusing on how do we make capital cities, the state capitals, better and get some people moving out. And there's some solutions there. I get frustrated when people turn up and tell me about all the problems without having the solution. So in terms of people voting with your feet, as you mentioned a moment ago, there are some solutions there without a doubt. And one of the solutions is awareness. And when people vote with their feet, they don't know there's an alternative. And that's where Evo Cities has been very successful. You've seen the document there, 2,313 families, 6,245 people have moved in the short time that Evo Cities has been in existence. And we've had limited funds. We've had $4.7 million, of which more than half was provided by the councils. The federal government was quite good and gave us a reasonable amount. State government has only given us less than 5%, and we had some corporate sponsorship there. But when you break it down, when we look at what's contributed to the 7 Evo Cities, has been about $220 million from the Evo Cities campaign, because we did some survey work and we found that each person, each family that moves contributes $94,909 to the economy. We've had 1.95% population growth as a direct result of Evo Cities. Put the numbers together, you get $220 million. From that, as I said, $4.7 million is all that's been invested for that. So it's been a cost of about $750 per person. And so that first step in terms of a solution is education. We believe there is ignorance, and I use that in the nicest possible way, ignorance in capital cities of what regional capitals have to offer. There is no doubt about that in my mind. And it's a terrible thing for any taxi driver that picks me up in Sydney, because I'll work on him for the next half an hour to get him to move to a regional area, and I never tell him who I am or what my position is, but I'll quiz him about why he
As
lives
Uber
there.
comes to the capital cities, that might be the only way you can make a living.
It might be. But what I typically find is people have this distorted view of a regional capital. They don't really know what we've got to offer. So that's one area certainly is awareness, raising the awareness. There's no doubt about it that policy change from a federal government could make change. And the government and across the community, we don't discriminate on age, we don't discriminate on sex, but we absolutely discriminate on location. So when you've got staff sitting here working at Parliament House, if one of those staff members said, I want to live in a regional capital because all I do all day is sit in front of a computer and use a telephone, then they would not be allowed to do that. And I know of examples where people have told me they actually have worked in Canberra, worked for a government department, wanted to move out somewhere else away from Canberra, and were not allowed to do that because the job was here. So we actually discriminate on location. Even though we're not allowed to discriminate on sex or on age, we're allowed to discriminate on location. So that's a definite policy decision that the government could make. Then you start to get to some more technical...
Such a decision is fraught, however. There have been some attempts to move in Minister Joyce's area. He's
to
keen
Dubbo,
on
right?
moving people to the country and meeting with a lot of resistance.
Right. But what I'm saying is, don't force them to move. If there is an option for people to move, there will be people who would want to live in regional capitals. And that's the examples that I've seen where people have wanted to live in a regional capital, but they weren't allowed to because their job was at a certain location in a metropolitan area. But if you go to some more technical issues, I believe tax breaks have been talked about a lot, but I think there is money to be saved in what you could spend in some of the capitals at the moment, the state capitals, and then having tax breaks. Businesses will vote with their feet then if they can see an advantage. And the other one is not moving government departments. I think government departments, Joe, is definitely fraught with danger, but moving individuals or encouraging individuals. And the way that could occur is that you could build, I came up with a sexy name for it, you could build a CATO, a combined agency teleworker office. You could build a CATO in a regional capital. And the idea there would be that you've got all the same infrastructure, the same connectivity, the same ability to work as you would in your office. Yeah, sorry.
Bloody good idea. Very soon there'll be an announcement in Tasmania and Hobart and Launceston of building two things very similar to that.
Perfect. Yeah.
If
I see the word CATO,
collaborative infrastructure.
yeah, if I see the word CATO there, I'll be asking for some.
Well, they
copyright.
won't be called CATOs,
Okay.
but they're co-working spaces with all the right hardware, and they're also designed to capture tourists who come to town who might want to do a working holiday and spend a lot longer doing mountain bike tracks and other things. But it's a great idea.
Yeah, perfect. So that sort of thing where, because sometimes people say, I couldn't move my job to another location because there's not the infrastructure in place, which then comes to the NBN, and some of the Evo cities have got the NBN. They're in the process of being connected. I won't go down the whole argument of fibre to the node and fibre to the premise. I've had that argument with Mitch Fifield. I lost the argument. Dubbo is going to be a divided city, for example. We're going to have 4 FCMs FTTP and 3 FCMs FTTN. Again, I'm not here to argue that particular case, but having connectivity...
If you did, you might find us sympathetic.
Could I say once again, I mean, Launceston, where I've got, Senator Bullock and I were discussing this in Townsville, I got some federal funding to set up this kind of thing you're talking about, and I think we do have fibre to the home. We're one of the few that do.
Yep.
It'd be really interesting to roll out this model around the country, especially for rural and regional areas where you do have these co-working spaces.
And that was probably my point, that if you were looking to where to focus, I mean, I know NBN wants to get connections where people are going to connect and generate some income, but having a priority on regional capitals to get them connected sooner rather than later would allow some of these particular things to happen, like building a CATO or whatever the government might call it.
When you build a CATO, you build a community around it. People like to work with other people. They can work in cafes or they can work from home on the laptop or whatever, but if you've got a cheap, affordable co-working space with the right feel about it, where there's cafe and there's other people around and the energy spaces, that we know that people are social beings and these things work.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a great idea.
So that's kind of the opening statement, if you like, and I'm happy to drill down a bit more on some of the data from Evo cities, and some of the data is quite fascinating. I mean, in Sydney, and again, we focus on New South Wales, obviously, but in Sydney, 66%, and we do ongoing surveys, 66% of people in Sydney would consider moving out of Sydney. So they've already got an idea in their head they want to get out of Sydney, but they don't know.
Price is so low, having lived in Sydney.
Thought it might have been 99%. But people don't know. And if I use a taxi example again, I jumped in a taxi earlier in the week and in Sydney, and I said to the taxi driver, where do you live? And just the sort of normal questions I'd ask. He valued his house at $3 million. He was working 12-hour days, 5 days a week, so he was working very hard in his taxi work. He was in his mid-50s, and I said, well, why don't you retire? And he said, I've got years before I can retire. I said, well, if you own your house, and he only had a small amount of payments to go on the house, I said, sell your house here in Sydney, move to Dubbo. You'd struggle to find a house over $1 million. What you would have in Dubbo for $1 million would be so much grander than what you've got here for $3 million, and you've got $2 million to play with for a little while. I think you could probably survive on that for a little while, and cost of living would obviously be lower. But people don't know that. They're not aware that that is even an option for him. He had never contemplated doing that or even thinking about that. So that's where Evo Cities, in terms of that awareness. So 66% of people want to be out of Sydney. When people move to an Evo city, 75% of them say they've got more free time, and a lot of that is around the commute time. The average commute time now is about 5 hours a week. And then you've got 81% of people say that the trigger to get them to move was not so much the mindset of moving, but the job. They didn't move without a job. So 81% of people moved after they got a job. And the unemployment rate is very good, because the unemployment rate in Evo cities is about 2% lower than the national average. And if I pick on Dubbo, because I know Dubbo's stats better, we're sitting at 3.6% at the moment unemployment.
That's very impressive, and different to a number of regional capitals where unemployment can be an issue.
So what it means for the Evo cities is that we are crying out for more people. And the thing that is inhibiting us at the moment is really lack of funding. I mean, we're going through a process with the state government now trying to get more funding, because at the moment, for the last couple of years, it's been entirely funded by the councils. And we don't get a direct return on that investment. So we put in $420,000 a year at the moment across the 7 councils. We still have to balance our books. So we don't see a direct return on that investment, or a short-term direct return on that investment. I think the state government and the federal government were very good in the early days in putting some money into that program. But again, that's basically entirely funded by councils at the moment, and it's a large burden for those councils when we're all trying to be, especially at the moment, under amalgamation microscope, and all trying to be considered whether we're fit for the future. Putting money into that long-term investment is very difficult.
Well, I'm going to be critical of Senator Whish-Wilson here, as is my want from time to time, because he's driven this inquiry along, and we visited Townsville, and I got a very good impression of Townsville as a go-ahead place. And I can't imagine why Senator Whish-Wilson didn't insist that we go to Dubbo, because clearly they've got some civic leadership in Dubbo that's...
You need to speak to the Secretariat.
Your enthusiasm for Dubbo and for the Evo cities generally is highly commendable, and the results, the economic benefits, to me seem to speak for themselves. So I commend your enthusiasm.
Thank you.
There should be more, and I appreciate the funding difficulties, because it's relying on the councils that have a restricted funding base. But while the short-term rewards for Dubbo and the others may not be huge, the long-term rewards are certainly there for the taking. And
absolutely,
I'm impressed with the unemployment figures, and I think you're onto something. I'll just ask, and perhaps steal a question from Senator Whish-Wilson, by asking what work, if any, you're doing at looking at getting immigrants into the Evo cities, as well as established Australians.
Yeah, so we're not specifically targeting immigrants. What we have said to both levels of government is that the Evo cities in general, and I think regional capitals in general, are open to accept immigrants. We do have immigrants come in. We do have a multicultural society. We have a multicultural festival each year. We celebrate people from different areas. We have flag raising ceremonies for the Philippines. So there is no doubt about it that we welcome people with open arms from wherever they come from in the world. But just from a financial perspective, we do not go out and target immigrants in particular. We really say...
It could be hard. I wonder, if you had done it, I would have wondered how you do it. Now, having been critical of Senator Whish-Wilson, I'm now going to be critical of Dubbo, because a little place I always used to enjoy visiting on the way west to where my grandfather was born in Nyngan in 1871 was Wellington. And when I inquired of Wellington how they'd come into such decline, they pointed to you and said it's all Dubbo's fault.
Well, we're under a proposal at the moment to be amalgamated with Wellington, so that's interesting. Dubbo doesn't want it and Wellington doesn't want it, but that's, again, something way outside this inquiry.
Senator Whish-Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm interested just with the people that you said that have moved, how many of them have stayed?
Yeah, good. It's actually one of the things that, because the program only started on the 22nd of September 2010, it's only a short time. And when I came into the chair last year, that was almost the first question I asked. How do we know the stats on those people that have stayed? Now, we don't have absolute cold hard stats on that because it's very difficult to obtain stats when someone leaves the area. And we're actually working on some things with Australia Post at the moment to try and track some of that better. But what we do is we do random follow-up interviews with various people because we rely on a lot of survey information being filled in and to get various data, some of the data that I've quoted. So we do random surveys. Some places do it 6 months, some places do it 12 months to find out where people are at. And we get a very low rate, and I can't quote you the percentage, but a very low rate of people that leave because this is what they've always been looking for. When they finally, it's almost like a light bulb goes on and they get out to a regional area and they find that we've got all the things that a city has got to offer, a metropolitan city, but in a regional, and we call it regional city living. And one of the things we found with our advertising, for example, is that people don't respond, when we do Facebook advertising, people don't respond to pictures of bushland, of open areas. People respond to pictures of the main streets of these cities, I suppose, hustle and bustle of a city, but in a more relaxed environment. So people are making a city change. They're not making a country change or a tree change. They're making a city change. So when they do that, they're incredibly happy and incredibly relaxed there. I also do, in Dubbo specifically, a new residents night every 6 months. So every 6 months we put on a night and everyone that's moved to Dubbo in the last 6 months come along. And I do that to welcome them to Dubbo, but I also like having individual conversations with people. And people love coming along because council gives away free alcohol, so you don't get much out of council very often. So they love to come along to those nights. And just talking to those people individually, they just have beaming smiles on their face because...
Free booze.
Free booze, that's right.
Congratulations on your re-election program.
I interview them late at night, obviously. but realistically, they feel like they are now in a home, in a community, rather than in Sydney where they would spend hours a day in the car and they would really struggle, I suppose, about trying to keep that community built around them.
It's interesting because it's an issue in my hometown of Launceston as well. People fall in love with Tassie, they come down on holidays, they move, but we don't know how long they stay.
Yeah.
Anecdotal evidence is only 3 or 4 years.
Yep.
That could be weather, it could be lots of things, but it's in retention of good skills across a lot of different industries is also a real issue. It's actually attraction and retention, getting people to come down and live. So I'd be interested in keeping in touch with you on that. Can I ask why other regional capitals haven't signed up to Evo cities? You've got a list here.
Yep.
Albury, Armidale, Bathurst, Dubbo, Orange, Tamworth and Wagga Wagga. You're involved in both organisations. Is there a reason others, is it a funding issue or is it...
We don't let them.
You don't need it.
Evo Cities is...
Too much competition.
Well, Evo Cities was formed with criteria, and you asked the question of Andrew Van earlier, the definition of a regional capital. When we created Evo Cities, and again, that was before my time as mayor, when Evo Cities was created, I was a councillor and certainly involved in it, and there were certain components that we said, if we're going to attract people from Sydney, we need to have an experience that's a Sydney-like experience. So there were certainly a number of towns and some smaller cities that wanted to be a part of Evo Cities, and in the list of criteria that we had there, we said, no, sorry, in the marketing that we're doing, you don't match these components here, so sorry, you're not going to be part of it. And some places complain bitterly, and that's one of the issues for the state government in terms of the funding, because they'll cop some flack from some of those places aren't part of Evo Cities. So it's been interesting.
So Newcastle and Wollongong thought they could stand on their own 2 feet and didn't need to join the team?
Yeah, I don't classify Newcastle and Wollongong as regional, and that's certainly an issue for people in real regional New South Wales. If you talk to people in regional New South Wales, we tend to think the sandstone curtain is the divider between regional and the coast. So Newcastle and Wollongong, I mean, there's a standard joke that New South Wales stands for, NSW stands for Newcastle, Sydney, Wollongong, because so many people see Newcastle and Wollongong just part of Greater Sydney, and that's really what tends to happen there. So they've got enough advantages that they don't need to be part of an Evo Cities campaign. Queanbeyan was one that we spoke to in the early days. Queanbeyan ticked off all the boxes to be an Evo city, and that was one that we had some discussions. They chose not to be a part of it. Funnily enough, they've actually come back and had some discussions with us recently and said, actually, this looks like it's working quite well. What are the chances of us being a part of it now? So there have been some that wanted to be a part of it, definitely, and we said no. Others, there's probably only Queanbeyan that I can think of off the top of my head that said they wanted, that we would say would be a part of it, but they weren't. But Queanbeyan as well has probably got that natural linkage with Canberra.
So am I right in assuming you're only looking to attract people within New South Wales? You're not externally, like in Queensland or Tassie or wherever?
Dollars-wise, yes, we would love to attract them from everywhere, but the reality is with $420,000 a year for a marketing campaign...
Yeah, and you've got a big Sydney, you've got a big city on your doorstep.
So what we do is we target the hurt area of Sydney. It's really... We specifically focus on the western area of Sydney, because what we find with that, and again all the research shows that those people in the western area are the people that have the longest commutes, they're under the most mortgage strain, so we focus the hurt area there. And so that's where... And again, with that limited funds, we don't get very far. So in the early days when we had a little bit more money, we used to have billboards on the freeways, we'd have billboards or signage on buses, for example, and that got some great traction there. But now we're limited mainly to social media advertising and some other placements in other mainstream media, but we just don't have the funds. And we could almost draw a direct correlation. It would top out at some point, but we can say to an organisation, for every $750 that you give us, we'll get an extra person to move to an Evo city. It's almost as simple as that. Now, again, that graph is going to tail off at some point, but we've been nowhere near tailing off that graph. So we could attract people from other areas, other states.
Well, could you aggregate the concept to something like regional capitals with 30 partners and advertise nationally for along similar lines? Yeah.
So one thing that happened in the early days, yes, is the short answer to your question. One of the things that happened in the early days was that Simon Crean was the minister responsible for the initial funding of Evo cities. They talked about the concept and monitored how it went, and then there was some discussion when Labor was still in power that they would actually roll that out, a similar concept, into some other states. So it was going to be state-specific, but used, or the model of Evo cities as such. I don't think that happened once there was a change of government. Things changed a little bit, but certainly there was a view to say, let's go and roll this out because, gee, it's been successful in New South Wales. Go a step further than that and look at regional capitals. Yes, I think you could do the same concept in regional capitals and really, again, have some criteria about what it meant to be a regional capital, and then that attraction process in the areas across the state capitals and start to try and attract people. It's probably slightly easier to go in the same state. If you're in the state and you're attracting people from Sydney to regional New South Wales, I think would be easier than attracting people from, say, Brisbane to regional New South Wales. But there is still, without a doubt, the potential to do that across the nation.
But there'd be potential, if the Regional Capitals Alliance did this as an aggregated group, there'd be potential to attract people to Townsville from Brisbane or to Mackay or other areas.
Yeah,
so
what we've set up...
Dubbo's the centre of your heart, but but just thinking more broadly, this kind of thing could work.
Absolutely, and what we've set up in terms of the way we do it in New South Wales could be picked up and moved to every other state around the nation with some minor tweaks, but really the concepts are there and the concepts are the same.
Well, it's good to hear your evidence, because in Townsville, Senator Bullock and I, we had some witnesses who it was Professor Paul Burton, and he's obviously on Regional Development Australia Board and involved. He talked about the UK trying to attract people to the regions from London, and they basically failed. And his view was that you've got to look at the difference between push and pull factors, but he didn't seem to think push factors worked.
Yeah.
Like whereas if you invested in these areas, the pull factors might work.
Yeah.
But it sounds. I mean, I've always been of the view that with certain kinds of people, the lifestylers, people looking for a different quality of life, that it would work. It works in Tassie. People definitely are interested in coming down our way for that reason.
Yep.
And it was something I wanted to actually explore in the inquiry. So.
And Andrew, and I don't want to keep pointing back to Andrew's evidence, but Andrew gave some examples about educating people in regional areas. And what we see, and I go back to when I was at school, all of our Year 12, I went to school in Dubbo, and all of our Year 12 all just about went off to university elsewhere. I was one of the smart ones that came back to Dubbo, and the rest of them are lost across the nation and across the world. And so one of the things that's good now is we've got university presences, we've got CSU, obviously, and the University of Sydney in Dubbo. And so you get some people to stay there. But when we look at our age demographics, you still see from 18 till about 28, we do drop off compared to the national average in terms of age demographics. From 28 to, say, late 30s, it actually jumps above there. And what we find is that people go and get their education, go and explore the world a little bit to a certain extent, and then when they want to settle down or want to get a bit serious about a family, they say, well, gee, I don't want to live in a metropolitan area, I want to move to somewhere regional. But what also has been successful is that the University of Sydney has got part of their medical school where they do years 3 and 4 in regional areas. So we have 16 year 3 students, 16 year 4 students as part of their medical school. And the stats that they've got, and I sit on the Sydney University Community Advisory Board as well, the stats that they've got in terms of people that end up in regional areas is quite incredible. And some of them will end up in Dubbo. So for example, this year when we had our Welcome to the Students, there were 9 interns at Dubbo Base Hospital, and of those 9, 7 had been through Sydney Uni's rural program. So they definitely want to come back to regional areas, and they don't all come back to Dubbo, but they experience the lifestyle. And I talked to one of the young students just a month or so ago, and I said, why did you pick Dubbo? And she said she'd never been across the mountains ever in her life. So she was, and Sydney now is a postgrad degree, so she would have been 22, 23, never been across the mountains. And she came on a bus tour, which Sydney Uni do to show people the regional areas, and was amazed about how nice a city that Dubbo looked like. And it was almost, she didn't say it, but it was almost, you've got bitumen on the roads, you've got power. It's almost that bad. So her total ignorance of someone who was very intelligent was remarkable. And then I said, so what do you think now? And she said, well, I love it. I've been here for a couple of weeks. I experienced the bus tour. She said, I'm going to move to a regional area once I finish. I mean, the dramatic change in people once they see it. And that's a one-off example of someone being aware of what we've got to offer in regional capitals, but that's where a marketing program like Evo Cities is very successful, trying to show what we've got in regional areas, that we have art galleries, that we have picture theatres, that we have sporting ovals. I mean, all these things that people just think we don't have. I mean, it is almost as bad as we have electricity or we have mobile phone coverage.
Could I ask you about that? Because a lot of evidence we've also heard around the country in places like Geraldton, Launceston, probably less so in Geelong, and certainly in Townsville, is that there are social disadvantages in some of these regional capitals. There's issues there that need to be solved. Is it with the chicken and egg thing? Are you confident that the regional cities can take on this extra growth, or will there need to be investment by government at all levels of government in capacity constraint issues around water as well as social disadvantage?
Yeah, so there's probably 2 parts to there. If I'll just focus on social disadvantage in the first place, I think what we see in terms of social disadvantage is really about income. When people have jobs and they have income, we don't see the same, and I'm talking very much broad picture here, we don't see the same level of social disadvantage. So given the fact that 81% of people don't move to an Evo city until they've got a job first, they might have made their mind up 6 months ago, but they look for the perfect job in that Evo city and then move there. Given the fact that they're injecting money into the economy, we think it actually would help the social disadvantage rather than be a detrimental factor.
I understand that, but look, the example you gave earlier about the taxi driver, and if he could cash in his $3 million home, by the way, he could get a home in Launceston for about $300,000. That'd be fantastic. So he'd have more money in Launceston if he's listening. If his family or he was to move there, are you confident that the hospitals, the healthcare services, or aged care facilities, all these things are in place? Because we have heard evidence that they are struggling in other places.
It depends how quickly that growth occurred. So in the short term, if you had growth that was reasonable levels of growth, I think those various services would grow to accommodate that. And what that would be, it would actually add to the multiplier effect. So the hospital has more people, the schools have more people, so then they need more people to run those, so then we get the multiplier effect of one person moving ends up being 2 people that move to that particular area, or probably not that ratio. But yes, if there was a huge spurt in growth, and I'm talking about mining type growth, so if you get a mine move into some area, that's where some of those services really struggle because they just have an unnatural injection of growth. But I think what we're talking about here, I mean, Dubbo, since the last census, has grown at 2.6% per annum. It's fantastic growth, but it can handle that growth. It can handle 3-4% per annum growth, and those services can ramp up to accommodate that because they'll then advertise for more jobs, which then more people that want to move out of Sydney move to. And so it really is that snowball effect where it's rolling down the hill and getting bigger and bigger. I think if you wanted to have 15% per annum growth, some of those services might start to struggle a little bit. Our services, council services, wouldn't. Water, sewer, our general infrastructure wouldn't. Our zoned land, those things wouldn't struggle. But certainly some of those services, if you had incredibly unnatural growth, I think would be a bit of an issue. But I think in general terms, no, the regional capitals and the Evo cities in particular are absolutely ready for that type of growth.
So that's it.
So just on growth, a chap that used to work for me was for a decade or so the mayor of Wanneroo, which was a very fast-growing city
Yep.
in Perth, and he constantly was concerned about the high level of population growth. Wanneroo's over that period was either the fastest or the second fastest growing area in Australia, with the Gold Coast being the rival, and providing the services that were demanded to meet the population growth out of the existing rate base. So your existing rate base has got to provide the funds to provide the service for the new areas. He said it was a nightmare, but you say Dubbo, no problem.
Well, I'd say Evo City's no problem. And let me just put that in context a little bit. And what's the population of Wanneroo?
Oh, look, I can't tell you off the top of my head, but I can't tell you.
Yeah.
Hundreds of thousands.
It would be over 100,000.
Yeah, okay. So what I would say in terms of the way I would see Evo cities, the population of the combined Evo cities, the 7 cities, is about 320,000. But the real population, the serving population, is about 1 million people. And so to give you a quick example, again, using Dubbo as an example, 41,573 people in Dubbo, but our service population is 140,000. So when you've got our hospital, for example, more than 50% of the admissions to our hospital come from outside the 2830 postcode. So what we've already got, and that's not just Dubbo, that's essentially most of the Evo cities.
And that's the function of a regional capital, right, to service its
Absolutely right. So what you've got is we say that the Evo cities population, serving population, is about 1 million people. So the Evo cities are serving.
I've got the 41,573. What would you say with the surrounding area?
140,000 is a conservative number for what we would serve, and that we go across an entire area of small towns.
Yeah, Wellington.
Wellington that need to come to Dubbo for their services and a whole range of their services. So we've already got the infrastructure that's serving a larger population than we've got. So I think you'd find specific examples like the example you gave where it may struggle, and depending how quick that population growth is. As I said, if we had 15% population growth, I think that'd be a problem. But if we had 5% population growth...
I think you've explained it. You've got a far broader base to service that hub.
Yeah.
So I didn't understand the answer to the question. Now I do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
So I lost my train of thought there about Wanneroo, actually, funny enough.
Distracted
you. In terms of Dubbo, I don't know if you heard infrastructure, the Regional Australia Institute earlier today.
No, I missed that one, sorry.
Yeah, are you familiar with them at all?
I do know the Institute. I don't know what they were presenting on today. I haven't read this.
It was on the terms of reference, but they're saying that obviously over the years they've been set up, they're looking at all the issues that the committee is looking at, and they've come up with a model they call city deals for a nationally coordinated infrastructure approach that the federal government plays a key role where basically there's a pool of funding and each regional capital would access that pool and there'd be incentives put in place by government for each town. I was just interested if you knew anything about the model.
No, sorry.
If not, it might be interesting for you to have a look at.
Yeah.
But they were sort of saying the biggest frustration they have is that, and I suppose they're a dedicated institute to these issues we're discussing, is just a lack of data. That there's very little that's collected by census. They can't work out across 3 levels of government how much money is actually being spent on infrastructure or social capital, or what social returns on investment are, and all these kind of things. Are you confident that we've got the data in place to take a federally coordinated approach to growing regional capitals?
Yeah, probably not, and certainly one of the things that we did initially with Evo Cities was some of that initial funding we got from the federal government was wrapped around actually doing the research, and I think that was absolutely critical. Where we're at now, the success we've had, in my mind, is absolutely no doubt that that's because we know how to target and we know what people are after. Even that simple example I gave where we use pictures of main streets of people drinking coffee rather than bushland because people don't want to move to the country. They want to move to a city. So just simple things like that I think that research is absolutely vital. And so I'm confident that we've got our research right for Evo cities, but that did cost us a little bit of money, which, yes, in an ideal world would be fantastic to spend on advertising, but we needed to know how to target that advertising so that we can make best use of it. Across the nation, I think the comments, which I'm taking your second-hand version of the comments, but basically
It can be a dangerous thing to do.
I would agree entirely with those in that there isn't enough data, and trying to break the data down. I from time to time get into ABS and look for various things that I might want to see in terms of where we might be headed or conversations we might have with government, and I don't find really the level of detail that I would like to see in all of that. And I suppose when that detail is there, it's still not communicated that well. And one of the things that I find embarrassing, and I saw it again recently, you have various organisations that come through Dubbo and visit and want to talk to the mayor. We had a person probably at the third level down from CEO of a major bank, headed up a huge area across the nation. And the first thing the person said to me when they met me and shook my hand was, "So how long have you been on a farm for?" And I showed them my soft little pathetic hands and said, these have never done a day's farming work in their life. The Evo cities, the population in agriculture is about 2.5% in terms of that sector, that agriculture and fisheries sector, about 2.5%. The number one employment sector in Dubbo, for example, 16.6% of our employment is in health and social services, 13.3% is in retail, 10.8% is education. These aren't things that people know about. People think you come over the Blue Mountains in New South Wales and there's farmland. You just walk over there and that's it, it's just farms, and that's all you see.
It does look like that from the jet plane, though.
Yeah, when you're up at 36,000 feet.
That's right.
But this is the thing where people have that lack of understanding. So additional research to actually have the information, but then getting that information out there, disseminating that through the entire population so that people don't think we're a bunch of farmers living in regional Australia. There are people who are very successful, who are doing the same work they could do anywhere in the world. We've got an A380 pilot that lives in Dubbo, and his commute to work is he jumps on a plane in Dubbo. We've got 144 flights a week between Dubbo and Sydney. He jumps on a plane, goes to Sydney, and that's about a 50-minute commute to him because he's at the airport, and he's got friends that fly A380s that spend an hour and a half travelling from the North Shore. So you can do whatever you want from a regional capital, but it's just that mindset.
Well, it's actually interesting. I think what you just said then nailed what the Regional Australia Institute said today. They said that basically you're better to invest in growth from within in a regional capital, which will filter out to the broader regions, but rather than focusing on attracting people to the regions, and that flows into regional capitals. So I think what you're saying today is people want to live in a regional city. They want to see that kind of tangible evidence that they're in a community space, and that maybe rather than targeting on strategic investment in the outlying areas, it's better to actually target getting people to these.
And we've done some recent research, which wasn't part of that submission, so I can't quote the numbers off the top of my head, but we've done some recent research for Evo cities to show that those outlying areas. So Wellington, as an example, if we advertised Narromine and Wellington, which are the two small towns on either side of Dubbo, if we advertised people to come to Narromine or Wellington, it wouldn't be overly successful because that is that view of a country town. But what we do find, two things happen. People move to Dubbo or are attracted by Dubbo, and then they look around at house prices. Our median house price in Dubbo is $320,000, and the $1 million example I gave was for a very nice house, but $320,000 is the median house price. But they look at Narromine and they say, oh, it's only $240,000 for the same house in Narromine, and it's a 20-minute commute. Whew, I've been used to a 2-hour commute. 20 minutes, that's nothing. So people then move to those areas. But then also when Dubbo grows its population, people do go to the region. So they do actually attract people to the region, whether it be for visitation or whether it be for living there. It attracts money to the entire region. And the group of councils we have around us is called OROC. There's 12 councils in that. And if you talk to the other 11 councils outside of Dubbo, including Wellington, they love Dubbo because they know that without Dubbo, all of their places would die a very quick death. Dubbo is what they need to make sure they've got a central focal point for their region.
So Councillor, you're in terms of Evo cities and your attraction policy, it mentions business, targeting small businesses, but do you actually, when you're targeting people and saying, have you considered Dubbo, are you trying to attract certain kinds of people in employment sectors? Like you're saying, we need nurses, we need engineers, we need agricultural workers, we need doctors. How are you doing that? Because I know when I worked at my cellar door in Tassie for years, everybody would stop and would talk to you and say, "Well, this looks great. Like, this is what I've been looking for. How easy is it to get a job here?
Yeah.
Or what are the schools like? Or what are the hospitals like?" I mean, is employment the big limiting factor for people moving from a place like Sydney to Dubbo?
Not really. We don't target specific vocations. Again, just not the funds available. But what's been incredibly successful is, as part of our Evo Cities project, it was identified several years ago. In fact, I identified it with our committee that people weren't moving without the job first. So we created a part of our website called Evo Jobs. So it is just like a normal Seek or a normal online employment process, but there are only jobs advertised in the 7 Evo cities. And that's been incredibly successful. Businesses in the 7 Evo cities can advertise on there for free, so they can post their jobs there. The amount of traffic that goes through that site is incredible. So we don't target a particular vocation, but if people look for jobs, they can look for jobs specifically in our cities by going through the Evo Jobs process. And then they'll find, if they're a nurse or they're a doctor or they're an engineer, they'll find those jobs that suit. And then because we've got such low unemployment, people are finding jobs. When they make their mind up to come, they'll find a job.
Okay. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but I did want to, perhaps, if you've got a very, very brief reflection to the committee on some federal grant funding programs that are in place at the moment. Like the Stronger Regions Fund. Have you seen much contribution to your area from that federal fund?
We did get some contribution for that for our sale yards. So
Right.
we've got a sale yards. It's the number one sale yards in the nation between combined sheep and cattle. So we did get some money in the first round. We didn't get any in the second round, and obviously we'll look at that in the third round.
So, excuse me, do you do pre or post sale weighing? So it's another committee.
We do post.
Carry on.
That's right. So what we find is some of the one-off funds, such as National Stronger Region, are great when you get them. They're disappointing when you miss out on them.
Yeah.
They do seem to be a little bit sporadic, and they don't seem to always be based on merit. Sometimes I feel that
They're transparent?
I don't think totally. I think what you find with some of those funds, it almost feels like we weren't confident about getting money in the second round because we got some money in the first round. Even though we had some great projects we're putting up in the second round, no one has ever said, and no one will ever say, well, you got it last time, think yourself lucky. But you just get that feeling sometimes that no matter how strong an argument you put forward, the decisions aren't really based on straight merit. And it's a bit frustrating from that perspective. And what we end up doing often is we built a tiered theatre 5 years ago. We felt the community needed it. We went and looked for money. We spent $18 million of our own money because every conversation we had with federal government and any conversation we had was, oh no, you don't need a tiered theatre in Dubbo. And the community need was there, and it's now our third best tourist attraction.
Okay. Just quickly, can you give the committee a very, if you've got a rough number, it doesn't have to be exact, what kind of underinvestment you've got in Dubbo in terms of infrastructure, broadly infrastructure that can include projects in the social capital area like a community hall.
Yep. So you're talking about...
I was trying to get an idea of like how much hasn't been invested in.
Yeah, so
shovel ready would be good, like rather than just broader concepts. But
yeah. So do you want to figure that's what we're investing over the next couple of years, for example?
Yeah, what's in the pipeline that things you need money for?
Yeah. So we've got about 25 million at the moment that we're spending. Some of that we've got some money for. So the cattle
I
yards.
think he wants to know what you're not spending.
Yeah.
If you can't fund.
I'm sure there'd be a bottomless pit in every place for like what you'd like to have money for, but things that you can't spend, you can't afford to spend money on that you need done.
Yeah, okay. I would say if you said to me, here's a bucket, choose from that what you need to make your community better.
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't spend all of that bucket in Dubbo. I'd spend that bucket on some better linkages, and as an example, a tunnel under the Blue Mountains between Dubbo and Sydney would explode the growth throughout regional New South Wales. And the numbers that I've done on that, it's a $2.8 billion build. The productivity return will be $595 million a year, and it'll be a 19-year payback just on the toll alone. That's the sort of investment that would be fantastic for regional Australia. That's not just for Dubbo. The entire Central West, what that would do would explode the growth in Central West. You would have people then saying it's easy to get, because the mountain scares some people about getting over the mountain. So there's a spend that I think, and when you've got $8.3 billion being spent on the North West Rail Link, $2.8 billion being spent on a tunnel is not that big a deal. But whenever I say tunnel to state government, they usually laugh at me because it just seems like such a far-off project and not the return on the investment. But I've done the numbers and the return on the investment is there. So there are some projects like that.
$2.8 billion undercooked, to be On the basis of no evidence at all, that sounds extraordinarily cheap to me for a tunnel going to the Blue Mountain.
Well, and you may be right. That's a desktop calculation that I've done, and so, but no one even talks about it because they all say it's too much. And of course, I say, how much is it? And no one knows. So how can you possibly say it's too much when no one actually has done the calculation? So I've done the calculation based on a bunch of information from Australia and around the world, and that's the figure I came up with. I would accept absolutely that it's not a very accurate figure, but I'd love someone to have an accurate figure and then wrap a bit of ROI around that, because I get frustrated when people make decisions without having the data. And when someone says to me that tunnel's too much, when they don't know how much it is, or they don't know the ROI, then they're really just making it up. So that's, I know that's a very long answer for your short question, right. But that sort of investment in the community itself, we have invested significantly over the last 10 to 15 years on infrastructure. So we have built a cultural centre, we have built the tiered theatre that I mentioned before, we've upgraded our swimming pool, we've upgraded things that make us money, like our airport makes us money.
Have you had to borrow from the private sector at all to help fund any of that?
All of that. All of that. Yeah, we've got in the vicinity of $50 million in loans at the moment, in various facilities in the private sector there, to do all of that. And we have built up a good solid council, so we've had the ability to do that, and I think most of those regional capitals have that. So the infrastructure that would make a difference to regional areas really is about connectivity, so linkages, and then some of the things that I mentioned in my opening statement, where I talked about some policy changes and some of the things that you could do in tax breaks, in tax changes, things that would actually make it attractive for people to move there. Building a shiny new indoor swimming pool that matches what's at Homebush in Dubbo is not going to be the single thing that attracts someone. It's nice for Dubbo, and if you want to give us some money for that, I'll take it. But
sure,
but it's not going to be the single attractor that makes people suddenly say, you know what, I'm going to go out there because they've got a Homebush.
I might leave you with this to think about, because certainly if you do look at that Regional Australia Institute model, that the city deals where there's a pool of funding available, and each regional city would have to pitch for why they would get access to that pool. It'd be interesting. I'd be interested to know what kind of things you think would be necessary to grow Dubbo.
Can I say one last night? I'm not sure what time to finish, sorry, but can I say one last thing just in relation to that?
Sure.
I think it's sexy for a government to say we've handed out and put a big number up there. It's almost like the Hollow Man, it's the whistle number.
Yeah, we're not talking about that. We don't have big numbers to hand out.
But whatever number, but I in terms of affecting long-term growth in regional capitals, having a big pool of money there wouldn't be my first solution.
No.
I'd be going in other paths. And again,
they're saying a similar thing, actually. They're not suggesting a big pool of money, but they're saying it's got to be very strategically focused.
Yeah, and so it sounds like I'm arguing against, and I hate saying this, sounds like I'm arguing against you giving us money to spend. I'm not. No. I'm saying the best way to spend the federal government's money, I don't think, is having that big pool and putting in big one-off projects. And we saw a little bit of that when Tony Windsor had balance of power. We saw some money being spent in certain areas that wasn't strategic. And now some of those areas that have got some of those pieces of infrastructure, the biggest problem they've got is how to pay for them on an ongoing basis.
That's right, maintenance.
Yeah. And we got some money out of the federal government recently for an athletics facility, which is a fantastic facility, an international class athletics facility. It was a $5.7 million build, of which about 3.5 came from the federal government. Fantastic. But in terms of all of our long-term strategic planning, we've put money aside because we know that track will be replaced in 20 years' time. We've got to be putting money aside now. So that's costing us money every day, but it's a great facility for Dubbo. So those big pools of money sometimes aren't great for a community.
Yep.
Mr Dickerson, we've met some very committed and articulate and visionary representatives of regional capitals in this inquiry. You're amongst their number, although I think you probably get points for enthusiasm. I think you're probably the most enthusiastic representative.
Thank you, Joe.
Geelong has come close, but nevertheless.
Mayor of Geelong, you're right up there with the Mayor of Geelong. Your hair's probably not as...
Yeah. I don't have the same colour hair.
So thank you very much for your contribution today.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed your presentation and the passion that you have for Dubbo. And as a person with roots even further west in New South Wales than you, I applaud your efforts. We're going to break for lunch until 1:15 in order to allow our staff to have a break.
Yep.
So
Thank you for your time.
Of course, would just plough on.
Thank you for listening.
Come all the way over the